This podcast is brought to you by lineupmedia.fm.
Welcome to the Circuit of Success, and thank you for joining me. You know, it's been said that success comes to those who wait, but I believe the opposite. I believe that it's earned with the right attitude, a great belief system, and action every single day. When you mix that in with faith, courage, discipline, and most importantly, a vision, that's when greatness happens. Now let's dive right into this week's guest. Welcome to the Circuit of Success. I'm your host, Brett Gilliland, and today we have in the office, or the studio as we like to call it, is John Blumberg. John, welcome to the show.
Brett, great to be here with you.
It's exciting, and really, I appreciate you even doing this in person. I know you drove down from Chicago to spend some time with us. For those of you, my good friend over here, you can't see him on the camera, from KPMG, Andrew Davidson, and so appreciate the introduction, Andrew. And we're going to have a great show today. John is an author, he's a speaker, he's a husband, he's a father, he's a Christian, he's all sorts of stuff, so it's going to be fun. So as we do with everybody, John, why don't you just take our listeners through a journey of your life, if you will, and tell us what's helped make you the man you are today.
Yeah, I think I think you name it well, in that it is a journey. And I think at any moment that you think you've arrived, or that you think, okay, I've got this all figured out, that's where you're back to ground zero. And I just watched the evolution. I spent 18 years at Arthur Andersen. Actually started as a CPA in audit, and I always say shifted my focus from numbers to people, and spent the bulk of my time there actually working on the human development of our professionals, and spent a lot of time eventually helping direct our recruiting worldwide. And through that process, there was a lot that I learned about myself as I helped others learn about themselves. And I think over time, I just thought if you could help others be better at what they do. And it really culminated, I was in a firm-wide role, and we did these student leadership conferences. And there was a guy, he was a student that came up to me at the end of the presentation. It was a 3-day thing. I had a Saturday night keynote that I did in my role, and it was called Getting a Vision for Your Life. And people would always come up and say, John, I like your stories. But this guy, Sam, walked up, and he said, and he was the last guy in line, and you always pay attention to the last one, right? Because they don't want anybody behind him, all right? And he said, Mr. Blumberg, what you shared tonight, I think will change the direction of my life. And what's ironic about that is I wish I knew Sam's last name, because I would go find him, because a year later, him coming up to me that night changed the direction of my life. Walking away from pretty much everything, a firm, a position, everything that was wonderful was a stumbling block that I had to let go of. And I've learned a lot about letting go in the years to follow, but it began this journey of eventually leadership, and then eventually core values. And of course, you can't go out and be speaking on something that you're not continually growing on.
Yeah.
So,
and would you say that was a passion of yours when you were a child? I mean, were you pretty focused on people and growing and reading books and doing all those things, or is it something that as you climbed in your career that happened?
Yeah, I think I think people that knew me back then would always say that friends, relationships were always critical to me. It was kind of funny, even though I had majored in accounting, I always had this thing when I went out to do an audit at a client. And it was a time where I would say the clients aren't quite as sophisticated as they are today, and they were a little bit terrified when we came in. Right. And my goal, literally, intentionally, was that when we left, they would be sorry to see us go. And so I think there's elements of relationship there, connection, that was, I think, probably always important to me. I would have never, in my younger years, seen it play out the way that it's played out, but it's kind of that lamp into your feet thing, right? Yeah.
So let's talk about that. To what Sam said to you is get a vision for your life. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, I think I think first of all, there's a bit of a paradox at play, because I think that it's important to look inside and begin to understand who you are. And then where do you want that person to go? At the same time, the paradox is, I think you also have to hold it lightly, is that you, yes, have to have that vision and play of what you think you're trying to either accomplish or who you're trying to become. But along the way, know that every day, if you choose, is going to teach you a lesson that may very well change the course, and that the original vision may have nothing to do with what the ultimate vision will play out to be.
And that's what we talk about on the circuit of success, and you can see it behind us, is once you have that attitude and you have those beliefs and you do the actions, you ultimately get results, but that's going to create a new vision.
Yes,
right?
That's
and so
exactly
I think that's what's important about that circuit of success is as we travel down the road of success and as we climb the ladder, do whatever we need to do in our lives, I mean, it's constantly, in my opinion, working on that vision and thinking about that vision, because what was a goal and a dream 10 years ago probably isn't the same goal and dream today.
Yeah, in fact, you would hope it wouldn't be, right? That if it is, then you probably haven't truly grown in the process.
Yeah. So let's talk about your book, ROI. Everybody knows what ROI is, right?
Of course,
but
you
decide to change the I. So walk us through that. Why? And I love the name of the book. It was a great book. For those of you that do or don't follow me on social media, it's one of those books that I was highlighting last month, and it was a phenomenal book, and that's why we're sitting here today. So talk to us about ROI. Obviously, we think of return on investment, but you changed that.
Yeah, and first of all, Brett, thanks for diving into it and also having me today. So I began looking at this whole issue. I had been working for a long time on the importance, and this was part of my own evolution from leadership to what really fuels leadership. And my focus became laser on the idea of core values. And so as I began to understand that I was only on the surface of what this was about, I started what I thought was going to be a 1-year journey to write this book, and it turned out to be a 4-year journey. And part of it was because I began to understand, as you start digging into this, it's so much deeper. And I was really feeling like if the leader at the top, the CEO, or whatever the name of that leader at the top is, if they're not all bought in, this isn't going to go anywhere. And I knew that the leader at the top thought about ROI a lot, of return on investment. But this was not what I was focused on. I wanted to literally reframe the first thing they talked about when they talked about ROI, and therefore the name of the book became Return on Integrity. Right. And it has been quite a journey that absolutely continues. In fact, there's been so much that's come from it, of my own growth, of being challenged by great questions, great insights, but also understanding this is much harder than I thought it would be for individuals. And I'm talking about good individuals with lots of substance, and it takes a lot longer to dig to the level that I'm talking about on what their core values are, and that would define that integrity.
And I'm excited too to dig in, because I came up with mine. I did the role play or the exercise, right? And I always hope people do that. When you see an author, when they're that committed to telling you to put their own book down and do the homework, I'm like, I got to do the homework, right? Because he's telling me to put his own book down. But anyway, so I did it. And then doing my research for today, I found that one of the words I use, which we'll save for later, you say is actually not a core value. So I'm excited to jump into that.
Yeah.
But, so let's talk about, you have the other book, Silent Alarm, which I got phenomenal. That's a novel.
Yep.
This one is not a novel.
Right.
Why is that?
Yeah. And I got a lot of push as I was beginning to write it, John, who is the organization that is doing this? And you need to showcase 1 or 2 organizations that have done this. And I said, this is the challenge when you're trying to chart new ground. I felt like I probably could go out and find some that looked like they were doing it, but the truth was I knew they weren't. Right. And that somehow did not hold integrity. And so I had to go with this idea that, and I come very directly at it in the beginning of the book, and I said anybody that's seen my speaking, anybody that has read Silent Alarm knows my love of story. But this is not a storybook. In fact, it is not for leaders that are looking for those stories. I say those are followers in leadership positions. What this book is about is equipping a leader to create the story. And my hope is that in going through, and it was designed to be the scalability of the message, is that they would be able to take it and actually create amazing stories about how they also were on the surface of where they thought they were. They thought they were at the bottom of the well, that they really had dug as deep as they could and realized they were only 1% in, and they create an amazing story. And we're beginning to see some organizations make some headway, but this is not a short-term thing, right? And we're a short-term mindset.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those books you really need to dive into. So if you're like me and you have the attention span to maybe read about 10 pages a day, right?
Yeah.
Which is it's a good habit to be in. But
Yeah.
it also allowed me to slow down enough to really think about it. And we're going to talk about one of the quotes later that I know Andrew and myself really connected with in the book. But, so when you think about that stuff, you talk about the 3 Ds, right? You talk about dilemma, you talk about definition, and you talk about destiny. Right, so let's spend some time on the dilemma part. You had your CEO sampling.
Yeah.
Tell us about the CEO sampling and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, so my publisher was making a big push saying, John, you got to get to a solution. You cannot spend a third of the book on the problem. And so my gut said that if you get a top leader starting to think solution, they are going to absolutely blind out what the real problem is. And there's no way are they going to be able to dig deep enough unless they really have investigated the problem. So I decided to go out and ask leaders at the top. I really want to dive into why is it so hard to know and to live core values in the world that we live in today, in the pressures that are on business. Because I didn't want people to think, well, he's out kind of in la la land. He has no clue what day-to-day life is. I clearly understood that. But I was also shooting pretty high to what I thought we could get to, or digging pretty deep on what I thought we could get to. And so I said, would you be willing to sustain a fair amount of time to really understand the issue at hand before you ever got to the solution? And 100% of them said, John, the moment you start talking solution, I quit thinking of the problem. And I think you're right. I need to understand the context much broader and deeper than I've ever given the thought to it. Yeah. And that's where the evolution of dilemma, played out.
Yes, I think as leaders, right, we're fixers. And so we don't want to be on the problem. We want, even at home, right? You can get into a discussion with your wife and it's like, here's how you're going to fix it. Yes. And they just like, no, be quiet. I want you to listen.
Yes.
Right. And so that's what I found in the book is, and I say this all the time, you got to slow down to speed up.
Yes.
Is to really define what those core values are. My business partner, Tim Hammett, is phenomenal. He talks about his respect, trust, and humility. Every meeting we're in, I can see it coming from a mile away. I know what he's going to talk about, but that's just to his core how important it is for all relationships. So all of us leaders, I think we need to go through the exercise. And the way I did it was I wrote down as many words as I could think of that could be a value. Yeah. And I came up with mine, and it was, I love the word grit. And so mine came out to grit. It was growth. Yep. It was respect. I for integrity, which you say is not a core value, right?
We'll get to that.
And trust.
Yes.
So we're going to get to that. But for me, then that allowed it to become something that, okay, grit, I got to work hard. I got to be a leader that's getting up every day and doing my deal. And so we'll get to that stuff, but I think it was important. But what's that one dilemma that you think stood out the most to you?
Yeah. So I think one of the critical dilemmas is it's the assumption that we think we got this. In fact, I actually believed when I started this journey that 95% of professionals, and I'll put it in the professionals world, actually knew their core values. Yep. And I couldn't have been more wrong. Actually, the percentage was correct. Unfortunately, it was just the opposite. And I get a lot of pushback on this, Brett, because people will say, well, I'm a values-based person. Right. And I'll say, that's great. But some of the worst, most evil leaders in the world were value-based. It's just a matter of which values, so specifics matter. Or people would say, well, John, I got a gut feel, or I got an intuition of what my core is. And I said, that's awesome too. And I don't have the research to prove this, but I believe that probably 30 years ago that would have worked. And that I think a lot of people operated that way. But today, the biggest difference is the speed at which we move and the change at which we face and the disruption that's at play. And I guess the way I've most recently framed this is that the faster we go, the deeper you have to be grounded. And I think it's a critical, not only leadership skill, I think it's a critical survival skill, whether we're talking organizations or more importantly, individuals.
Yeah. And I think you would agree with this, and I think Andrew probably would too for what he does every day. I think in the next 5 or 10 years, it's going to be the only thing that separates businesses.
Yes, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a recent survey where integrity for the first time is the number one choice in choosing a professional services firm. And it was the first time. I don't know if it's been on the list before. It might have been lower on the list, but now it's the number one. And I think we're hungry for it. I think we're in a world where, I don't know, there's been so much on brand and on the veneer that people have begun, I think, unknowingly to buy in that that's enough. And it's never enough for, again, going back to the lifetime journey.
And that veneer you're talking about too it's what it looks like on the surface of the table, right?
Exactly.
I know you talk about that in your book.
Yes.
And so it's getting deeper and truly understanding what you are.
Yeah,
right?
and I think and if you assume you've already got this, you're never going to go below the surface, and you'll never realize that I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And so when I think of integrity, I think it's a much, I want people to think about it in a much more challenging way, a much deeper way, and I think hopefully in a much more adventurous way than they've ever come close to giving it credit.
Yeah. So let's talk about the destiny part of the book. I know you almost didn't include it in the book, and you actually call it the Destiny Roadmap.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
I just felt, okay, I've got to somehow give some direction to this, because we go from dilemma and then we go to the definition of figuring out what this is, the biggest deep dive. Okay, so what do I do with this? And again, I'm talking to leaders at the top, and the conventional wisdom was you got to give them some help. My biggest fear is that they would say, okay, let's just cookbook this thing. There's got to be a solution that is universal, and it's just not.
Right.
And so what I ended up doing is trying to create this roadmap that I trusted that if you had been through the dilemma and the definition part of the book, your mindset would be in such a way that you would never read this as a cookbook.
Right.
In fact, you would just use it as a framework to stimulate your own creative thinking. And so the risk of what I feared would go away. In fact, so much was afraid of it that at the beginning of the book, I said you could jump to the third section and have a roadmap, but do it at great risk because you're not ready to do this, and you can't lead it if you haven't lived it.
Right. Yeah, I think calling us out on that, it made me read the first two parts. I'm like, oh gosh, he knows my type, right? He knows I'm going to jump to the end and see how to fix it.
You probably didn't know I knew you, did you?
Right? No, you're reading minds through your book. So, so when I did do your homework, I'm curious to find this out. So I said mine was grit and the I was integrity, right? Why is that not a core value?
Yeah.
Why am I wrong?
Yeah, and I've had some people on the surface looking, are you kidding? It's like on the list of most every organization. A good buddy of mine said it's our number one value. Here's the thing, and this probably the seed was planted a long time ago with Warren Bennis, who I always say is the grandfather of leadership books, was a professor at the University of Southern California. And he said that honesty is when somebody asks you the question, you tell them the truth. And integrity is that you do what you said you're going to do. And if you really think about that, that integrity is not itself a value, it is the fabric of every value. It is literally what makes values valuable. Now, I absolutely have no problem with somebody having integrity on the list because I think it's a great reminder. And when I frame out, there were probably 3 words for me, Brett, and you can look up a lot of definitions and you go around and ask a lot of people what integrity means. There are 3 words that really played out for me, and one is whole, undiminished, and the idea that it's integrated. And so if you really think about it, if we think of our values, the risk can come out to be that we think of them individually. Imagine what your grit is like when they're playing off of each other, and sometimes may very well be in conflict with each other or be challenging each other. So the integrity is not only about this whole idea of whole and undiminished, but it's also the idea, is it all connected? Does it all work together? And when it does, then you ultimately have integrity.
Yeah. Because so you could just peel that onion layer back more. So go to my G, which is growth, right? I believe to my core that if you're not growing, you're dying, right? And so if you're not working on yourself mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, all things we talked about at lunch today, Matthew Kelly helped me with.
Yes.
Is if you have those things, if you don't do them with integrity, then it doesn't matter.
Yes.
Right.
That's correct.
Your intentions and your motives, as Tim, my partner, always talks about, right? If they're not in the right intention, the right motive, or have integrity, then the growth doesn't matter.
That's correct. In fact, it's a perfect example, Brett, because if you, we've seen a lot of people grow exponentially, but did not have integrity. And so growth of its own it's the neutral thing that can be amazing, or it can be very dangerous. But when you combine growth in the context of everything else that you have, you get a different kind of growth.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, because growth for the sake of growth doesn't matter. Right.
Exactly.
So let's talk about one of my circuits there, belief. And I read somewhere that you talked about why it's so important for your belief to be in line with what you do for a living. What did you mean by that when you said that?
Yeah. So, again, it goes back to if it's not, then you're not integrated. In fact, you are disintegrating. In fact, at some point, it's just a matter of time. I do try to distinguish between what our beliefs are and what our values are. Because sometimes our beliefs actually can get in the way of our values, or discovering our values, because we get very black and white sometimes, and it has a lot more to do with ego than it does and again, I try to distinguish between, this is not about what you value, it's about what are your values. And in the book, you probably saw where I tried to distinguish between behaviors, wants and needs and values. And oftentimes our beliefs are hung up in our wants and needs, and that can cause a lot of division, and oftentimes can cause you to go against your core values. But if you have your values in place and they inform how your beliefs come alive, and then those are in line with what you do and the relationships that you develop, then that's where the integration begins to come into play.
And I think too, when you think about it from a team standpoint, so let's look at it from a business. I look at, whether it's all of our advisors, our leadership team, whatever it may be, our clients, is you talk about the 3% usually becomes the 100%. And I love that part too, because you're right. I mean, the littlest argument could be like, you pick that piece of trash up over there and it turns into a fight, because it's not the 97%, right? It's that little thing that bothers you that turns into the 100%. So talk about that, expand on that.
Yeah, and I think this is why it's a day-to-day thing. It's a noticing the 3% before it becomes the 100%, right? And I think it's a daily review. Once you define what your values are, and I try to distinguish between knowing them, meaning can I list them, and that's true whether it's your personal values or organizational values, or do I actually know them? So when you tell me, for instance, that growth is one of your values, you so much understand that, so much more than I can understand it by knowing the word growth. That is a label that is of a great understanding to you, right? So as you get to truly know the value, and I would say by the daily review is how you get to know it, because you have circumstances all of the time that are teaching you what growth means in your world and how it shows up. And so that's why I think it's a day-to-day practice to I call it the PMAM. The PM is your personal values, that you every night, as you put your head on your pillow, or if you go to sleep in 2 seconds like I do, sit on the edge of your bed, but you go down the mental list of your core values and you review your day and where did they show up? Where was the piece of paper I either picked up or I didn't pick up, right? First of all, I would say you celebrate your values. Instead of trying to figure out where it didn't go well, let's celebrate where they did go well, because we learned from that. The second is then to go back and look across your day and figure out, if I'd only let that value show up, it would have made a difference. Not to beat yourself up, just to notice. And then the third is to go back across the video of your day and you look at that and say, where did I violate a value today? And we always do it. It's hopefully just at 0.5%,
right?
But we do it, but we notice it. Again, not to beat yourself up, but it teaches us and it re-engages us to be able to be better tomorrow. The AM is the same thing, except it's forecasting, and the A is all. It would be organizational values. But I think it's a daily thing that we get to know this, and we become better at it through that process.
And I'm big on visualization too. So when you said the video of your day, that really connected with me, because I'm picturing myself in my bedroom and I'm thinking about the day and where could I have done better, right? That's all you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So how important is visualization? That AM, One of my questions for you today is, what are the habits, what are the rituals of the best, right? You've seen some of the best leaders, really in probably in the world, but in America, leading some of these best companies. What are you finding their habits and rituals are that they do every day without miss to make them great?
Yeah. I think one of the great works that's been done in the last year, she kind of came out of nowhere to be a rock star in the area of vulnerability, and that's Brene Brown.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this idea, and what Brene so beautifully talks about, is vulnerability comes from a place of strength, not a place of weakness. And what I have found is leaders that I've seen that are willing to be vulnerable are always strong leaders. And so I think the best practice on it is, are you willing to be vulnerable with the one that's hardest to be vulnerable with, and that's yourself? Yep. Am I willing to see the truth? Because that's what we're really after, is we're willing to dig, or we're wanting to dig to what is ultimately the truth, and to not have any fear of what that truth is. And in doing so, I think we become better and better at being able to see the truth, literally in the smallest, and I love your analogy of the piece of paper. It's a great metaphor. I see it in the smallest way, because oftentimes it's the smallest thing that can teach us the biggest lesson.
Yeah, that's great. And so vulnerability comes from a place of strength and not weakness, and I love that. Because I think as leaders, and women are this way too, I'm sure, but especially for men, right? We don't want to admit, or we don't want to be vulnerable all the time.
Yes.
Right?
I think that's exactly right. Women, I think, and I hate to generalize at all on this, because there are certainly exceptions to every rule, but I think this process out of the starting gate will be easier for women than it will be for men, because they just call it for what it is. Right. And men oftentimes can have that protection mechanism. It's not intended. It's not a fault. It's just something they have to work through. Right. In the end, I think men and women are both absolutely capable as human beings to exactly where I think they are able to get to.
So I'm going to read you my favorite quote from the book.
Okay.
You think you know what it is? Without looking.
You want me to guess?
Yeah, I do.
Is it about the drift?
It is.
Okay, let's talk about that.
All right. So it's about the drift. So it says in the book, we don't go running away from our values. We go drifting away. And one day we wake up in a place we never meant to be, drifting in a direction we never would have chosen. Phenomenal. Phenomenal. And so talk to me about that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was sitting in a Starbucks in Naperville, Illinois. I initially thought authors went to chalets in the mountains, which, by the way, I did.
Some of them do, right?
I went away to Virginia to write Return on Integrity, so I got part there. But I was sitting there, and I wrote that, and I had no idea, Brett, that so many people, it is the number one call out of the whole book. Right. I'd say 99% of the time. And I should have known because of my own life, because I think the reason we relate to it is because we've all experienced it, right? And I think our willingness to admit that's the issue.
Right.
I was speaking at the University of Alabama, and a woman came up to me after a keynote, and she said, we've been talking about drift, and we've been talking about core values, and she said, John, it kind of dawns on me. How do you know that you ever left if you didn't know where you were to begin with? And it was just like gold, right? Because if you assume you know your core values, we're all going to drift. Even if you, with your grit, you're still going to drift, but you're going to catch it. And that's the whole thing, is can you catch your drift, or have drift catchers in your life that you give permission to? Because we all are going to do that. I was speaking to an 8th grade boys class about 3 years ago. I was actually doing a favor for a friend, and I don't have stage fright. I think it's a miswiring. Right. But I was terrified talking to these 8th grade boys about core
You never
values.
know what's coming, right?
You never know what's coming. And the guy at the end of the session, they were doing a little Q&A, and he said, Mr. Blumberg, do you think other people see you drifting before you do? And I just looked and I said, Joe, I think you know the answer to that question. And he said, I know. Yeah. And I said, that's why you need drift guards. You're your own drift guard with the PM and AM, but you also need people in your life to say, if you ever see me drifting, and by the way, they need to be people who love you enough to tell you the truth and you love them enough to accept the truth when you don't like what they're saying. But in effect, it keeps the drift in check. Yep. And there's nothing wrong with, in fact, sometimes a bit of a drift can teach us something very powerful about what we know about our core values. Yeah. But they also, unchecked, will lead to everything that we see in the news, and certainly that we see in our lives of people that, unfortunately, and it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking because these are not bad people. These are good people that have drifted.
Right. I get the name of your next book. It's called The Drift.
The Drift.
The Drift. I like it.
Let's just go with that
Let's
one.
go.
All right.
The next book is called The Drift.
I can see it now.
I can see it as well. But, so, and let's talk about that for a second because you talked about the drift, what'd you call them, drift catchers?
Drift catchers.
And so I ask this to people a lot when we're in meetings, and I always ask for permission to challenge you or whatever it may be to hold you accountable because we love you, right? We love that person we're in front of. And I'll ask you this, who's the person in your life that has challenged you the most?
Yeah, it's a good buddy of mine. I guess there are probably two. One's a guy named Al. He's in Chicago. And another named Sean. He's in Vegas. And they're two very different people, two different, very different stages of life. Mm-hmm. And they would be the one to call me out. Yeah. They're the ones, we have those conversations that oftentimes you can only have with a drift catcher or a drift guard. There was something I learned. This is another guy that I would put in that list, a guy named Dave. We were having lunch one day, and we had a robust conversation, and we were just getting ready to leave, maybe 5 minutes before leaving, and Dave looked at me and said, man, we've covered a lot of ground today. What's the 5% that we didn't talk about? And it was a powerful, powerful question. And he wasn't like, what are you holding back on? He said, what are you not seeing that you need to put on the table? And I think we all need people like that in our lives. And we need to be that for people. We need to be willing to dive into the kind of relationships that I believe that I think we're called to have. And we're not called to have a bunch of those, but we are called to have a critical few of those.
I can't remember who it was, but somebody I was talking to talked about who's your 2 a.m. club that no matter what, right, you could call that person at 2 a.m. without asking questions, right? They're coming to get you.
They're coming to get you.
Right, they're coming to get you. And there's not a lot of those friends. That list is small, but I think it's important. And for our leadership team, we gave each other permission to be that drift catcher. Right? If you see me as the CEO of a company, or we see our COO or whoever it may be, we have to be, love each other enough to be able to call you on that. Yeah. And know that it's out of respect. It's out of, we care for you. We care for the people as a whole. So
yes, exactly.
I think that's huge.
And I think it takes courage to be that, for others. Right. It's easier to not call people out, and you always have to respect that when somebody else is calling you out. Yeah. Right?
And I think too is that they usually will see it before we see it.
Yeah,
right?
Most often.
But they got to have the courage to bring it up.
Yeah,
which is tough.
It gets better if you're doing your PMAM, but it's still, they're going to have a different viewpoint on it and a different set of eyes to see it through.
And I know Patrick Lencioni, who wrote a deal on your book for you, is a friend of yours. But I actually saw a video from him this morning, and it was talking about having the people around you that have the courage to give you it. Right? Because as a leader of an organization who you're writing this book for, sometimes they don't give that feedback because they think, well, my job's on the line for this. Right?
Exactly.
So I think us leaders and people that are leaders listening to this is be open-minded enough to get the feedback from the people that you should be trusting the most in your work environment.
That's exactly right. So
let's talk about fear. This is that question I told you about that I was going to ask you. And fear, how have you put that into your world throughout your Arthur Anderson days to now what you're doing, leaving a great career to kind of jump all in to go be a writer and a speaker and all that? That was scary. What kind of fears did you put in your mind?
Well, first of all, I think you have to lean into it, not fight it. I was being interviewed a guy was thinking about jumping off and going into speaking. And at the time, gosh, it's 22 years into it now, but at the time, 13 years. And he said, John, when does it quit being scary? And I kind of looked and said, never.
I'll let you know.
I'll let you know, right? I said, what's amazing, though, is you get comfortable being uncomfortable. And so I am not afraid of fear.
Yep.
In fact, it inspires me, and I don't run from it. In fact, I think it is the one thing that if you can hold open hands to fear, I think ultimately all the way to fear of death,
Yep.
is that anything is possible. It is amazing when we don't lean into it how it will shut you down. It is the most limiting factor, I think, of anything that we face. And I guess in some ways, how do you friend fear? Because it is your friend,
Right.
Ultimately, if you don't let it scare you to death.
Yeah, because if we don't have it, then we're probably not going to drive to be as successful as we want to be, right? Yeah. So the question I always ask is, how many of the fears you've put in your mind have actually come true to the magnitude you put them in your mind to be?
No, never.
Yeah. And that was my response, right, Andrew?
That
everybody laughs, right? And everybody says, oh, never. That just never happens.
Right.
And it's true. And I think my goal is I want to find the snippets from every one of these interviews and just put that on replay for people.
Yeah.
Because they never come true to the magnitude we put them in our minds to be.
And you know what's amazing is when you're in the next situation and it's creeping up on you, you forget that never is the answer. And
That's
it's
a good
really
point.
Good to remind yourself.
Yeah, you do forget that never is the answer. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's talk about the some more of the circuits here. Attitude. So when you hear the word attitude, what immediately comes to mind?
Yeah, it's critical. Absolutely critical. And I think you have to keep a pulse on that. Because I think drift certainly applies to values. It also applies to attitude. Mm-hmm. I think you also have to be careful on the people you surround yourself with. And I don't mean just to pick and choose people that only have good attitudes. I often think sometimes you need to take on the challenge of finding the person that doesn't have a good one and help them along with it. Because as you're trying to help others have a better attitude, aren't you going to have a better one because it's top of mind? Yeah. I think it's a critical factor, and I think we're all vulnerable to letting that slide and drift away the same way we are with values.
And that attitude, as you can see, there's a fence post, or the fence line goes across, and it's rejection, right? Because every day we can wake up, we can have the greatest attitude in the world when we get up, and you're going to go conquer the day. But you get in, and that little light over there is blinking on your phone, right? Rarely is it somebody calling to give you all the best news in the world, right? And so there's that thing called rejection, right?
Yeah.
So when you hear that, what I would say, how do you feed the positive dog? What habits are you finding that people do to get you in the best attitude, to stay focused, battle through the rejection? What are those things?
I think for me, first of all, don't take it personally, is that in fact, sometimes the rejection is the right answer. A good friend was just sharing with me that he said, he put it this way. He said, when you think you're winning, oftentimes you're losing. And sometimes when you're losing, you're oftentimes winning. And so what I try to look at is to say that just like fear, sometimes rejection can be your friend. Is that, in fact, if you don't take it personally, you don't absorb it, you just move on. You take the next step forward, and you keep going. Or you can choose to really sit on that. I was talking to another good friend recently, and he said he was talking about in the world of the NFL and how coaches have to move on to the next game. It's horrible that we had that terrible loss yesterday on Sunday, but on Monday we got to be getting ready for the next team because it has nothing to do with the loss that we just experienced. We need to learn from it, but we can't stay focused on it. And I think
those tough decisions. I mean, if you watch that Alabama football game the other night, to take your guy, what was he, 26-2 or something like that? And you take him out of the game and you put in a true freshman, and then the guy brings your team back and you win. I mean, he looks like a genius now, but that's the thing. Leaders have to make those tough decisions, and they got to live with those tough decisions. So.
Yeah, I remember Sean Payton, that onside kick at the beginning of the second half. He was brilliant because it worked, right? If that hadn't worked, people would have thought, "Are you kidding? Or you should never
fired."
Right? So, which probably takes us to the idea rejection could very well be a matter of perspective.
Right.
Well,
then you even go a step further with that Super Bowl game that everybody in the world thought that the Seahawks would run. They're on like the half of the half-yard line.
Yep.
They throw the pick. They lose the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Right. And if that had been a catch,
unbelievable,
unpredictable.
Right?
It's all perspective.
Right. So what would you tell yourself, the John of 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think if I'd look back and I would say be yourself, trust first into the path you've been called to, and I very much felt it was a calling. and to not let the day-to-day get you down, that it is all good and everything, whether it is a success or a failure, all is good. Just keep taking the next step forward.
That's good advice. That's great advice. What are you finding right now? And Andrew and I are part of what we call executive forum, and so the kind of the deal is all these this happens to be all gentlemen. We're in a group. We all run either divisions of a company or run a company, whatever it may be, and we talk about time and time management, right? And so what do you think the best leaders do, and what are they doing with their time? They run these big corporations. What are they doing with their time every day?
Yeah. I think they take, for one thing, I would say they're taking very intentional timeouts. I think we're past the point that anyone humanly can sustain the information, the speed, the pressures, the demands that come our way. And so I think the leader of the future is going to become very selective at where they focus their time. They're going to be able to be incredible at letting go of the things that don't matter. One of the best books I read in the last 3 years is called Essentialism. And I think, if I don't misquote it, it says 10% of what you do really matters and the other 90% is a waste of time. And I think when we're trying to time manage, you've got to be on top of what is the most critical. And I would suggest, and you're probably not surprised, is that your values will help you see that, and it's your needs, your wants, and your behaviors that will help you execute it.
So let's go back a little bit, actually, and let's walk people through. They're listening to this right now. If they're driving down the road, whatever they're doing, walk them through. How do you find your core values? What do you need to do? What's the exercise?
Yeah, and I wish I could tell you it's the most simple thing in the world, and I would suggest that it's going to be the biggest wrestling match you will ever have, and the most adventurous experience, and that you're never done. I compare it to digging a 100-foot water well, and by the way, the water is there whether you dig it or not. You just don't get to take advantage of it.
Right.
And I remember I was talking to an audience of 500 people, and I was talking about digging your water well, and I said, the sad part is you start digging, you start exploring, and I think there's a lot of ways that you can go after it. I think there are individual journeys. There are data points. I mean, there's all kinds of instruments on the marketplace that will give you scientific data points. Experiences give you data points. Relationships and meaningful conversations give you data points. All of that can feed in to this digging process, which is why I say that you work on it for 15 minutes and you put it away, and you work on it for 15 minutes and you put it away. And it's over a period of time. I think in 30 days you can come up with a pretty good starting version 1.0 list. But I think it's probably a year of going back and really honing it. And then I think it's probably several years that you go to really understand that. The frustrating part, and this has been my biggest lesson since the book came out, is, again, I go back to what I said earlier. This is harder than you think it is, and it takes longer. And both of those are a really good thing. It takes soul searching, it takes digging, and there's, in the end, nothing scientific about it.
Right.
It's an emotional journey that I think little by little gets uncovered. So I'm talking to this audience of 500 people, and I said, so the sad part, you get 5 feet into the well, and you know what you're looking at? And I said, you're looking at dirt, the same dirt on the top. You get 25 feet, you're looking at dirt. You get 50, you're looking at dirt. That's, okay, I'm done with this process. Right. And you're only really getting started. And that's the tenacity, that's the grit, by the way, Britt, that it takes to be able to get through it. So I'm now in this rhythm of asking the audience questions, saying, so you get to 75 feet, and I'm fully expecting that they're going to be thinking dirt, and somebody from the audience yells out, I said, you get 75 feet, what do you see? And they said, rock. I said, that's right. I didn't think of that, but that's right, because it gets harder before, it gets easier, it gets harder. It gets easier, it gets harder. The persistence of digging is what gets you to the answer. Now, here's the thing, and I've used this on a slide now, and I said, the sad part is, in all your digging, the sad part is you will not find your core values. Of course, a lot of people say, well, what the heck? Why bother?
Right.
And I kind of pause and say, the truth is, they will find you. And I think that's exactly what the truth happens to be, is that when you dig long enough, it eventually reveals itself. That's how truth works. And it's dawning on you that this is what it is. And then you label a word to name that dawning.
So, because you also think, you see the pictures too, where the people, they're digging for gold, what they're digging for, and then what they don't see is it's just right here on the other side, right? And they give up. and they don't get there because they can't keep battling through the dirt.
That's exactly it. Now, I don't know if I've ever publicly said this, but and I have to be careful about this, is ultimately the words that you choose are not as near as important as the journey that took you to them. And what I mean by that, and I go back to your grit, you understand growth as a value in a way that I will never see it, because it's a journey that took you there to find that out. Right. And so when it reveals itself to you, and I don't want to sound too kind of out there, but it is kind of out there, is that your understanding is far more important than the word that you put on it. And you will know what that is by the time you've dug to the bottom of the well.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, because if I could write the word and you just showed me and it said growth, there's a whole meaning and feeling that comes behind it. I could show the same thing to Andrew and oh yeah, cool, that says growth. That's right. There's a big meaning behind that.
And he's thinking, that's it?
Right. That's all you got?
That's all you got?
There's 17 years of stuff in here, right?
Exactly.
And a lot of meaning and feelings that go into that word. So
and I will say this, and we just have had the opportunity to meet, and what I would say, Brett, is it doesn't surprise me that that's a word that you use, because it just exudes out of you. And that's what you want your values to be. It's so grounded that you can't help but live that value. Right. And if you're not, it goes back to what you're saying, if you're not growing, you're dying. Right. I think that whole mantra plays. If you're not living your values, you are dying, and you can just see that come out of you. Yeah.
Well, I think it's quickly. Too, the people you surround yourself with, whether it's socially or professionally. For me, it's like it's not anger, but it's like I don't have much time to spend with somebody if they're not choosing to grow. Yeah. Right. I can't do it. Yeah. So I'm not saying that's right, but that's the way I am.
Well, and I sometimes go to events, and my wife kind of calls me out on this, but it's a surface level conversations, right? And that's just part of my style. If I'm at a party, I'd love to come up alongside you and we have a 20-minute conversation about something meaningful. Yeah. That's a much more fun party than we're just talking surface level. And there's a time and place for that, right? But there's also a time and place where let's have a meaningful conversation. Right.
Yeah. I'm terrible at the big parties of making small talk with everybody. I'm not good at that. As much as I can do this stuff, I can't. I'm not good at it. So share one of your core values, if you will. You mind doing that?
Yeah, not at all. So I think, and I've already mentioned it, and that is vulnerability. For me, I try to frame out what that means to me, but that's what opens possibilities for me. That's what builds connection for me. And it's also how I think I deal with what we've talked about earlier, and that is fear. Yep. Is that I'm willing to be vulnerable and find great strength, within that. Right. The other two are optimism, and there's a lot that drives me on hope, and then the other is relationship. I think we're wired for relationship, and when you put those three together, there's probably 15 things that underline what I mean by those, but it leads with vulnerability.
Well, I think that's huge too, because we've known each other now for a whopping 2 hours, 2.5 hours, something like that. There's that feeling of a deeper connection because of there was not a lot of surfacey discussions downstairs at lunch, right? And so I think for those listening, if you struggle with that vulnerability, that transparency, it leads to a deeper relationship much quicker
and more meaningful experience, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about your success. I mean, through your Arthur Andersen days to now. I mean, did you envision that success, or are you more shocked by it?
I'm shocked every day at what begins to play out, and I'd rather stand in awe than all of a sudden think it had anything to do with me. And I will say this, that the success I've had has had nothing to do with me. It's had everything to do with people that believed in what I was trying to do and trusted me in that process. And I give it all to them. And I mean that sincerely. I don't mean that just to sound kind of nice. There is... I don't know if there's any other way that I could frame that other than I love to stand in awe continually when things go well and I love to learn deeply when they didn't go so well, and try to stay out of the process of both.
These are tough questions. I know that, so I apologize. But so what would you, that one CEO, that one leader right now is listening, and you could give him or her one message, what would that be?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, of course, part of me wants to say dig for your core values.
That's the go-to answer, right?
I would say, okay, I'm just going to bottom line this: love others. I was talking to Beta Alpha Psi, an honorary accounting fraternity, 1,500 college students, and it hit me the night before. I was actually up at 2 a.m. and I couldn't sleep, and I was going to be talking about values, and it really hit me that you need to talk to them about love. We need to be more loving. And so at the end of the presentation, I just simply said, I hope that you'll do everything I've talked about today as it relates to digging for your core and, many other things that we've talked about. But if you don't do anything else, I'm going to ask you this, that when you put your head on the pillow tonight and every night to follow, just ask yourself the question, how loving was I today? And if you do that, everything else will fall in place. And what I was amazed at when all the students came out afterwards, probably 90% wanted to talk about that. And I don't know. I don't know of a time in our world where, maybe it's every time in this world, but we need to be more loving and less divisive. And I think maybe I don't call it out as a core value because maybe it's for me like integrity. Hopefully it's the fabric of every value.
Yeah, I think it's what we're putting in our minds, right? I mean, I literally made a decision back in almost, I guess it was about March. I'd find myself watching TV at night, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Like nothing good is coming out of this. And so I think I truly feel, maybe I'm being naive, but I truly feel as Americans, we're doing that, right? There is starting to feel like there's more love with all the bad stuff you hear. But I think if we can turn off our televisions and spend more time talking or reading or loving on others, this world's going to be a much, much better place.
It'll be a much better place. And I've always said I hate to talk politics and religion with people that agree with me.
Right.
I actually like to engage in that as long as it's not personal.
Right.
Let's find a way that we love through that, and we're going to learn a lot because of that.
Right. Absolutely. So talk to us, last kind of few questions here, but talk to me about the time, and maybe you've had them, maybe you haven't. Hopefully you haven't, but that's really a time in your life that it took you to your knees. And how did you get through that? How did you dig yourself out of that hole? I'm assuming you're going to talk about your core values with that, but can you share one of those moments with us?
Probably the darkest, hardest day of my life. I was 13 years old, family vacation, and my father dropped dead of a fatal heart attack. And I grew up in Memphis. We were actually over in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and just had gotten there that day. And that drive back was one of the darkest, hardest moments. And you talk about fear. It was a defining moment. And maybe what I've just realized, really almost more in the last 3 years, is how much I mislearned through that. Because as a 13-year-old, my brother, my oldest brother, got married 6 weeks later. They offered to postpone the wedding. My mom said absolutely not. And my other brother went off to a Catholic seminary. And so we went from a family of 5 to a family of 2 in a matter of about 12 months. And what you think of just starting high school, and I had so many people in that high school because my dad was very involved. I had so many people come around me and love on me. But what you feel like is I've got to get on top of this. I've got to control this. And what I realized is that I developed this, got to be in control, and ironically, it was totally the opposite of vulnerability. And 3 years ago, my buddy Al asked me the question, so how did you process that? And I said, you just got to move on. It's kind of that pull yourself up. And haven't really thought a whole lot about it. He said, I would suggest that you do. And it's pretty amazing when you look back. What I never could have learned then is what it revealed for me today. At the same time, I think it helped me along the way to a point. It was as good as far as it went. And then I needed to learn a different lesson.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. I cannot imagine 13 years old driving and your father passes away. That'd be the longest drive in the history of drives on the way home.
Yeah, and I've never been back to Hot Springs, and I probably need to go.
Yeah, you either never want to go again, or you may need to go visit it, right?
Need to go.
Just go do some therapy
I
down
hear it's
there.
beautiful.
Exactly. So what are you passionate about today that you wish, if you just had a magic wand, you had more time to go do? What would that be?
That's a really good question. I think I live what I'm passionate about, and I'm excited with what I do, being able to come alongside. Brett, I don't know anything more fulfilling to me than when somebody's willing to let you walk alongside them, again, in a vulnerable kind of way. There's nothing I'm more passionate about than to sit with somebody and be able to be a companion with them along their journey. So I get to do that. Yeah. I'm not a person that has a bunch of hobbies I played golf when I was in, grade school and played tournaments. And I know you took that much further. But there's nothing that's a hobby for me that I would say this is my go-to. It's much more, I guess, about relationship and whatever we're doing. Yeah. And I get to do that through my work, but I also get to do that through my family. I get to do that with friends, and I get to do it with executives that I get to come alongside.
Yeah. You have to just feel blessed every day, right? To get to do the things you love to do
every single day.
Awesome. So, talk to me about the purpose, right? So, I just started doing this, and your book actually helped with this. I always know why I get up in the morning. I know why I go do what I do, but I came up with a statement, right? And so my statement now is my number one purpose in life is to help people see and achieve a future brighter than their past. Right. So I know that. So help you see and achieve a future brighter than your past. And for me, that seeing it is number one, because a lot of people may or may not see it.
Yep.
But achieving it, right? Because you said it earlier, we can do anything we want to do, anything we put our mind to.
Yes.
And so I want to help people with that. And so what would you say your purpose in life is?
Yeah, I guess, and I have let go of, I guess, putting that in a sentence per se, but I would say help people live with integrity, and it's what I do. There's nothing that I'm more passionate about to do that. And if I can come alongside people and help them see that, and willing to see truth for all its ugliness and all it causes to fear, I guess it would be to live a more integrated life, not a more integrated success as much as a more integrated life, and which is the ultimate success. What I love about yours is that it's a complete celebration of growth as well.
Right.
And not only do you help them see it, you help equip them to do that, and that's what a great two-sided coin that is.
Yeah, thank you. And so I'm not going to give credit to this person because he may or may not be in the room, but we talked a question that he said, "That'd be a great question," right? And it's true, it is a good question, even though I'll not give him credit. Life is about experiences, right? So what's that experience, that next experience, that bucket list item for you? What's on there?
That's funny that you asked that question, because my wife and I, for the first time ever last year, started creating a bucket list.
Nice.
And we laugh sometimes that we're having an experience. We say we need to put this on our bucket list, so we
Add
can
that
check
right
it
now.
out. Right? Add it right now, because this
is amazing.
Yeah, and I don't have this kind of bucket list that says it's a grand experience or going to see this thing. It's much more about simple things, and there are some big things, I guess, that we could add to the list. Sure. But ours are much more. It could be. I want to make sure that we go walk in the park, a new park, right. This next month, and it's going to be the everyday simple kind of thing. So I may need you, Brett, to have a bigger vision for what that would be. But also on my bucket list is traditions, and I think of one. I'm just planning this out right now. My son in the. When we first moved to Chicago, people would ask, "Are you a White Sox fan or a Cubs fan?" I said, "Oh, I like them both." And now, having grown up in Memphis, I was actually a Cardinals fan.
There you go. Now we can keep talking.
But I found out that people would realize I wasn't from Chicago, so I like both. So actually, he started falling in love with the Cubs. So when he was in high school, every day I would get up and read the Cubs article because I knew he would talk about that.
So he already knew, right?
He already knew, right? And he would have that conversation as a teenager. And the more I read, the more I fell in love with the Cubs. And actually, as a fifth grader, one of our weak parental moments, he actually got online and signed up for season tickets. And 3 years ago, as a 30-year-old now, he actually got season tickets. So
that's great.
One of the traditions we started that was a bucket list item to begin with was to go to Cubs spring training every other year, father-son. And then we just go. And so this is our year. After they won the World Series last year, we thought, okay, that's going to be a kind of a crazy year to go. And this is the year we're going to go. Yeah. So for me, it's about putting it on the list, but then it's also about continuing the traditions where they make sense.
Get it. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Last question. I give you $10 million. You can't invest it. You can't pay off any debts. What do you do with $10 million?
What would I do with $10 million? You know what I would love to do is go out and invest it in those that have no resources. And maybe it goes back to have a great attitude. Yeah. They do want to grow. I would love to come alongside and bless them with the resources to go and make their dream come alive, and would want to do it in small quantities, and so that it would affect a lot of people. And I guess that would be my biggest dream.
I like it. And it does not surprise me that you're going to invest in others based on what I've gotten to know about you and researching you and now spending time with you today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Andrew, thank you for the introduction. And thank you for the time today. It's been great.
Great to be
with you. And I hope you, our listeners, got as much out of this as I got getting to interview John. And I guess I didn't ask you this. Where can we find more of you? So social media?
Yep. Probably the best way to start it, because it'll lead you there, and that is my website, which is Blumberg, BLUMBERG .com. So BlumbergROI.com, and it'll take you to my blog and and connect you to Facebook, Twitter, and such.
Great. Well, we'll find it there. And just again, thank you for being here. And I hope our listeners got a ton out of this, because I know I got a ton out of it as well, and lots of notes we'll be going through here. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Tune in next week for another episode of The Circuit of Success with Brett Gilliland on the lineupmedia.fm podcast network. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and through our website, circuitofsuccess.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and email any questions to info@circuitofsuccess.com.
This podcast was a presentation of lineupmedia.fm.